So in the last module 6, we were talking more about the Azure high availability, where we talked about the Azure standard load balancer and Azure application gateway series. Now we are moving into module 7 as part of the series of these videos, where we talk about Azure backup and recovery services. So as part of the Azure backup and recovery services, we'll talk about backup and recovery concepts. This many people might be aware of the basic concepts, but just for someone who is not aware of the simple concepts like RPO and RTO, maybe they can just listen to that. And lesson 2, we talk about recovery services vault. And third module or third lesson, we'll talk about Azure VMs backup and restore. And lesson 4, we talk about Azure virtual machine files backup and restore. And lesson 5, we'll talk about Azure file share backup. Lesson 6, we'll talk about storage backup and app services backup. And lastly, we'll talk about on-premises server backup. So in this video, we'll talk more about the backup and recovery concepts. As simple, maybe many people might have already aware of it, but just as part of this series before we go into the Azure backup and configurations. So just to rewind it. So as part of the backup, and so we use the terminology called as a backup source. So in a technical terminology or in theoretical, we call what data to be backed up in case of or protected in case of disaster or failure. Okay. So what data to be taken backup? Example, like you have an Active Directory. Now, for some reasons, if the Active Directory server goes down and we are not in a position to bring that server up and running, now we want to ensure that there is some kind of a backup alternative option where we can restore it or basically bring it back. So that's where we see we need some kind of a backup to be taken so that in case of something goes wrong where we are not in a position to bring the server up and running, we should have some kind of an alternative. That's where we call it as a backup. Like we see files and folders, you might have a file shares. Lot of data will be shared in the file shares. Okay, could be like in profiles, could be a project data, could be like an exchange of data. Now, what happens if this server goes down and for some reasons the data got corrupt because of the physical hard disk or something happened, but now the whole data is being lost. Maybe hundreds of users have been working on this file share, but all of a sudden it is now. How can we basically bring it back? That's where we need to have some kind of a backup. Okay, so that a copy of this particular data can be stored in some other location or some other device so that for some reasons, if something goes back to this server, we can restore or bring back the data. Similarly, like your a SQL database is SQL Server, we store a lot of nowadays we are using banking. We do a lot of bank transactions. They all go and stored in your database. Now, what happens if that database got corrupt or a database server got corrupt? But all the transaction details, my balance, my transfer, my credit, debit, whatever happened, all that being stored in the database. But if I'm not able to recover that, then we see all the customer data is impacted. So we see what is basically to be taken backup, what we called as a backup source. And we use called as a backup destination. Where do we want to store this data? Okay, where the backup data will be stored, protected, or copied. Generally, what we do at regular intervals of time. So we have a laptop, we take an USB drive, we keep copying data to the USB drive as a backup. What does it mean? If something goes wrong to my hard disk, my data can be available in external hard disk. Okay, if something happens to my laptop, still my data to a certain extent is available on the external hard disk. That's where the location where the data is being backed up. But in data centers could be a different approach, like we don't Maybe an external hard disk, which I said is maybe an example, but like we use like in tape cartridges, SAN storage, remote data centers where we locate cloud storage. Then another region in the cloud could be like a backup destination. It's nothing but where are we going to store that a copy of the data. We call it as a backup, a destination, and a simple terminology. So we use terminology called as a backup schedule or a policy. Okay. The policy defines what time the backups should be performed. Now, each and every source, an active directory, for an active directory, maybe a daily once backup. I feel it is okay for me every day one backup. If I go to the files and folders, if I take it a backup on it, and every 3 hours, okay, it should be sufficient because as users are storing their files, I want them to be backed up every 3 hours. Similarly, if I go to the SQL databases or Oracle databases, I want to restore, I want to have a backup copy for every 15 minutes or 5 minutes so that if the transactions should be in safe. So each and every application requires a different backup timings or backup policies based on the organization to organization and the criticality of the data. So that's where what time the backup should be performed, how long the backups should be retained. So how long we want to keep that particular backups preserved. Do you want me to overwrite on a weekly basis, or do you want me to keep a multiple copies of that particular data into multiple locations, or how long you want to preserve that data? So the backup policy will, and do you want to have a full or an incremental or differential backup should be taken? Like, do you want to take the entire source backup, or from the last backup you want to take only the changes which happened? Like that could be kind of things which happens there. So as we say that monthly full backup, it would be like an every first Sunday of month at 3 a.m. and retained for 6 months. A backup policy can say that, okay, a monthly backup every first, weekly full backup. A policy can say that every Saturday at 3 a.m. and retain for 4 weeks. It means that keep that backups for 4 weeks of time. Don't overwrite it. So you'll have four different copies of it. First week, one copy, second week, other copy, third week, a different copy, fourth keep. So that we can restore it to a older state if required. That is where we see what is a backup schedule or a policy. Then we talk about off-site, remote site, and DR site, like in based on the requirement. Let's say there is a data center or region one, I have a server. And if I keep the backup also in the same a region or a data center, now what happens if this data center goes down for some reasons? My backup is also unavailable because my data backup is also available in the same region or could be a data center. So worst case of situations, if something goes wrong to this entire data center or a region, then we lost this data. So that's where we used something called as an offsite, remote site, DR sites, where we keep another copy of the backup into a remote locations. For some reasons, the primary site, what we called as an where the server is hosted, is down, and the region is not able to recoverable. Then we have a backup copy available in another data center region or a region so that we can restore. So that the data is available. Maybe the restoration time may take time, but at least the data is available. Okay, that's where we use terminology called like an offsite, a remote site, DR site, because you need to have a strategy. Then backup retention. The most important thing, again, as part of the backup is in how long you want to preserve the backups. Okay. So how long the data is being stored and preserved in the destination. Every day I can take the backup, but every day I'm overwriting it. So what happens now? For some reasons, if there is a file deleted 4 days back and the data is already been overwritten by yesterday's backup, now I cannot restore it. So I want to preserve that retain that backup so that they don't get overwrite. So that I can restore, if required, I can restore the old backup so that available. Okay. So when the backup, it should be deleted from the destination. So the problem with the retention, they consume a lot of space because you are preserving it. How many days you want to preserve it, and how many weeks you want to preserve it, how many months you want to preserve that backups. Now, let's say when I say a first weekly full backup is retained for 2 weeks. As an example, I'm taking it as an 80 hour week one at 200 GB of size, which is happening on a 6th of September. Now, the second full backup of the same server is again having a 200 GB and happening on 13th September. Now, what happens now? On the first week, it consumed a 200 GB, and the second week, it consumed a 200 GB because as part of the retention, we are not overwriting it. So when it comes to the third week, the 200 GB, our retention is only 2 weeks. So what happens here is then the first week data will be deleted after the completion of this third week backup. So after successfully completion of the 20th September, the backup, the 6th September data will be deleted. So at any given point of time, we have a 400 GB of space consumed in the destination storage, and for which we might be paying it or anything else. But what is the advantage of this one having a 2 weeks backup, 2 weekly backups? So I can restore let's say I'm on date of 16th. So I can restore the backup of 6th September. If something happened between the 6th and 13th, I still have the data available in 6th of September. So I can restore from the 6th of September. So that way, we have some retentions. One more thing is the legal requirements, legal compliance requirements. Okay. So I have a user left the organization on a 7th of basically or September, but I still want to have his data to be preserved for 2 weeks of time for any compliance purposes. That way, keeping this particular backup for a period of 2 weeks can meet such kind of uh, compliance requirements. So we use something called as a backup job. So the backup job is basically what data to be taken backup. That is a server. Is it in an entire virtual machine, or is it an entire server, or is it a folder, or is it a database? What is that? Consists of destination location. Where do you want to store that data? And which particular target device? Do you want to store it in the recovery services vault, or which recovery services vault, in which region, and like in tape drive or a SAN storage or in remote location? Where do you want to store that? Consists of backup policy. How frequently you want to take the backup? Is it on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a weekly full backup and daily incremental? Like what is that exactly you want to have it? And triggers the backup job as part of the backup policy. So as defined in the backup policy, the backup job will be executed and protected. Let's say if my retention policy says that 4 weeks, the weekly full backup should be retained for 4 weeks, means as part of the backup job, the backup policy will be protected. So based on the software to software, it may get vary configurations, but this is the. So we use terminology called as a recovery point objective. So one of the key things which is a recovery point objective is okay, how much data loss is affordable in case of disaster or failure. This is very much critical. So when we are designing any kind of a backup solution, so we need to define like what is our RPO and RTO. Okay. So what does that mean by it? Like in yesterday at 3 a.m., I took the backup. So every day 3 a.m., we have scheduled a backup. For some reasons, okay, today at 2:59 a.m., the server got crashed. 1 minute before the backup, the server got crashed. But we have an yesterday's 3 a.m. backup. Now, what happened to the last 24 hours changes? Happened on the server. We don't have a backup. It means that I can only restore the data to till yesterday 3 a.m. But whatever the changes which happened from post 3 a.m. completion of the backup to till the last minute before the schedule, we lost it. That is your recovery point objective. Are you good with that? No, I cannot have similar kind of an recovery point objectives for a SQL databases because they're all transactions. So we might need some a strict, like in every 5 minutes or a transaction logs or some kind of things. Okay. It means the worst case of data, we lost 15 minutes and data of it. So that's where we see recovery point objective is very important in backup. One more, the recovery time objective. So what is this recovery time objective? How long does it going to take to restore a backup? Now you have copied the data from your pen drive, sorry, from your laptop to a pen drive. Now what happens? The pen drive, USB drive, read-write performance is very, I would say capacity is very less and very slow. Now if I want to copy and a 1 TB of data from an USB external drive to my local laptop again back, it may take some couple of hours of time. So similarly, you have a 20 TB of data where your server. Now, if you want to restore from it, how long does it going to take time? Now, if there is a server goes down and the business agrees that we should be able to restore the server within 4 hours of time, it means that my restoration process and the infrastructure which is required for an restoration process should support that RTO time, which is 4 hours. It means that I should have the necessary storage device which can allows me to restore fast, copy the data fast within the 20 TB of data within the 4 hours of time. We should be able to restore the data. It means that the recovery time objective has been defined by the management or the business or the application owner saying that, hey, we have given an SLA to the customer. That SLA is in case of any disaster, we are going to restore the server in a 4 hours of time. Do we meet this requirement? Okay, so that kind of situations we'll put up a proper infrastructure in place, and we use like instead of going for a tape drive, I might go for a disk storage. Okay, so I might keep the backup copy in another server, where the recovery process can be faster compared to the tape storage. Okay, I can have one copy in the local data center and another copy in the remote data center, so that if something goes wrong, I can restore from the local data center, okay, in a faster way of. That is where recovery type objective comes into picture. So whenever we are planning for any kind of a backups, so we have to keep two things in mind. One is in how much data loss we can afford it as per the business, and how soon we can recover the data. Based on this, we have to build our backup and recovery infrastructure in place. Okay? Right. That's the basic concepts of and you should know, do you want based on the RTO and RPO, your schedules will get changed, your retention policies will get changed, because these two derive the entire backup infrastructure. Those are just a simple, basic concepts. Maybe